A massive and dangerous severe weather outbreak is getting ready to unfold across a large portion of the United States. And I want to make sure that every single one of you is prepared and paying close attention over the next several days, because this is the kind of setup that does not come around very often. We are talking about a multi-day, multi-threat severe weather event that is going to bring the risk of significant tornadoes, widespread damaging winds, and extremely large hail to millions of people, stretching from the central and southern plains all the way back into the Ohio Valley and southeast. This is a pattern that has been on my radar for quite some time, and now that we are getting closer, the confidence is increasing that this is going to be a very significant and potentially historic outbreak for some areas. So let's get right into it, and I want to break this down day by day so you know exactly what to expect and when to be on high alert. Starting with what is happening today, we already have the Storm Prediction Center highlighting a large area of the Central Plains for severe weather risk, and this is just the opening act of what is going to be a very long and active stretch of weather. We have a level 2 out of 5 slight risk in place across a large chunk of western Kansas, southwestern Nebraska, and extending back into the Oklahoma Panhandle, where conditions are going to be very favorable for supercell development this afternoon and evening. Outside of that, there's a marginal risk stretching from Lubbock, Texas, all the way northward into portions of South Dakota, and even a chance of some severe storms developing out ahead of the main system across parts of Missouri and northwestern Arkansas. The main threats for today are going to be very large hail, damaging wind gusts, and the potential for a few tornadoes. I am particularly focused on the area just west and northwest of Dodge City, Kansas, because that is where the most favorable combination of ingredients is coming together right now. And that is where I think we are going to see our most significant storms of the day fire up. We could be looking at hail the size of baseballs, or even larger, coming out of some of the initial supercells, especially during the late afternoon window between about 4 and 7 p.m. local time. If you live in that part of western Kansas or into the Oklahoma Panhandle, I want you to have multiple ways to receive warnings this afternoon and make sure you know where you are going to go if a tornado warning is issued for your county. Now, the tornado threat today is something I want to spend a little bit of time on because there are actually a couple of different areas I am watching closely. The first area is right around the dry line in western Kansas near the Dodge City and Liberal corridor, where we could see a couple of discrete supercells fire up. And if those storms stay isolated long enough before merging into a line, there's a very real chance that one or more of them produces a significant tornado. I am not ruling out the chance of a strong and long-track tornado in that corridor, though right now the Storm Prediction Center has a relatively low tornado probability highlighted in that area because there is still some uncertainty about exactly where the cap breaks and how quickly storms go linear. The second area I'm watching is up across southwestern Nebraska near North Platte, where we have a slightly different setup with some backing surface winds and a decent amount of instability. And if a storm can get going up there before the wind shear becomes too unidirectional, we could be looking at a pretty photogenic and potentially dangerous tornado situation. So keep your eyes on both of those areas through the afternoon. Heading into tomorrow, this is where things really start to escalate in a big way, and I want to make sure you understand just how significant this setup is becoming. The Storm Prediction Center has already placed a level 3 out of 5 enhanced risk across a fairly large area of the Central Plains, and I personally think there is a very good chance we are going to see an upgrade to at least a level 4 moderate risk as we get closer and the models continue to come into better agreement. The environment tomorrow is going to be extraordinary. We are talking about very strong wind shear through a deep layer of the atmosphere combined with very high instability values and a sharp moisture boundary pushing northward out of the Gulf of Mexico. That combination is exactly the kind of setup that produces long-tracked violent tornadoes, and I want to be very direct with you about that. The area I am most focused on for tomorrow's biggest tornado threat stretches from roughly the Red River Valley of northern Texas up through central Oklahoma and into southern Kansas, where our significant tornado parameter values are being modeled as exceptionally high. On some model runs, I'm seeing values that I have only seen in a handful of setups over the past several years. That is something that demands serious attention. This wave is the third. And in the fruit orchards of Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and Virginia, the third wave arriving on already cold, stressed vegetation at the fruitlet stage of development is the scenario that determines the 2026 harvest before summer even begins. The fruitlet stage matters more than most people understand. After a blossom is pollinated and the petals drop, the developing fruit begins as a tiny green structure called a fruitlet. Fruitlets are more cold tolerant than open blossoms, which can be killed at 28 degrees or slightly above. But fruitlets are not immune. On healthy, unhardened tissue, a hard frost below 28 degrees can kill fruitlets outright. On tissue that has already been through 2 frost events, the damage threshold rises 30 degrees on a cold, stressed fruitlet that went through 31 degrees 11 days ago is not the same as 30 degrees on a healthy fruitlet in an undisturbed spring. The cumulative injury has reduced the tissue's ability to resist additional cold. Orchard managers in the Great Lakes and Appalachian corridor who have been fighting this spring since late April are walking into this weekend knowing that the margin between a partial crop and a failed season may come down to 3 or 4 degrees on Saturday morning. For vineyards, the calculation is equally serious. Grapevine shoots across the Finger Lakes, the Hudson Valley, Virginia wine country, and the Lake Erie AVA are now carrying 4 to 6 inches of new growth from the warm spell that preceded this cold wave. Each previous cold event forced the vine to abandon primary buds, which carry the best fruit, and redirect energy to secondary and tertiary buds with lower yield potential. Wave 3, arriving on vines already compensating for 2 rounds of cold damage, threatens to push some of the region's most productive vineyards past the point where the 2026 vintage is economically viable. The character of a wine region's vintage is often decided by a single week in May. This is that week. For home gardeners across the Ohio Valley, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast, the risk is more immediate and more personal. Every tomato plant, pepper, eggplant, basil, cucumber, and squash that went into the ground during April's record warmth has now been through 2 cold nights. The plants that survived are not the same plants they were when you put them in the ground. Their cellular integrity has been stressed. Their growing tips may already show damage you have not fully assessed. And now they are being asked to survive a 3rd cold night before the pattern finally moderates. A tomato plant that loses its growing tip in the 3rd week of May does not recover in time to produce a productive summer harvest. The plant can regrow from lateral shoots, but the timing is lost. The fruit that would have set in late June now sets in late July. In the northern half of the country, where the growing season has a defined end, every week of delayed growth in spring is a week of lost production in fall. Here is exactly what you need to do in the next 12 hours. Cover your warm season vegetables before sunset tonight. Not before bed, before sunset, while you still have daylight to do it properly. Frost cloth, row covers, old bed sheets, even upended buckets over individual seedlings all provide meaningful protection by trapping the soil's residual warmth around the plant. The soil does not lose its heat instantly at nightfall. A covered plant benefits from that slow release of ground heat through the night. The key is to cover before the temperature has already dropped, because by the time frost is visible on the ground, the temperature has been at or below 32 degrees long enough to have already caused cellular damage. Check the NWS frost advisory status for your specific county tonight and again tomorrow morning. Not your state, not your general region, your county. Frost boundaries follow terrain, elevation, urban heat islands, and proximity to water bodies in ways that produce meaningful temperature differences within a single metropolitan area. A city 20 miles from a Great Lake may stay at 35 degrees while an inland valley 10 miles further drops to 29. The National Weather Service issues frost and freeze products at the county forecast zone level for exactly this reason. Know your zone. Check it before dark. For orchard managers, this weekend is not the time to wait and see. Assess the condition of your fruitlets from the previous 2 cold events before Wave 3 arrives. Cut cross-sections of developing fruitlets and look for browning at the seed cavity, the clear indicator of freeze-killed embryo tissue. Know your current damage percentage before Saturday morning adds to it. This matters for crop insurance documentation, for management decisions about water and irrigation, and for honest accounting of what the 2026 harvest is going to look like before you commit additional resources to a crop that may already be below the economic threshold. Here is where we stand. The frost arriving this weekend is not the most extreme event of this spring. The hard freezes of late April that pushed into the upper 20s across the northern plains were more severe by the numbers. What makes this week's frost event dangerous is not the temperature in isolation. It is the position it occupies in a sequence. 3rd wave, 10th day. Already stressed tissue, already damaged fruitlets, already compromised cell membranes doing their best to hold together through one more cold night on plants that April convinced were home free. The old farmer's proverb says 1 frost kills the blossom, 3 frosts kill the hope. The science behind that saying is exactly what I have spent the last several minutes explaining. The cumulative injury concept is real, it is documented, and it is directly applicable to what is arriving this weekend across the Midwest and Northeast. The frost advisory is not a technicality. It is not the Weather Service being cautious. It is a specific forecast for specific temperatures that will do specific damage to specific plants in a spring that has already pushed those plants to the edge of what they can survive. Cover your garden tonight, check your orchard tomorrow morning, watch the NWS forecast for your county through the weekend, and understand that the restless, amplified, cold, warm, oscillating atmosphere that has defined every week of this extraordinary spring does not stop because the calendar says it should be warm by now. It just arrives quietly in the dark. And by Saturday morning, you will know whether you are ready. There's also a dimension of this that extends beyond the garden and the orchard, and it deserves to be said plainly. The northern plains, specifically the Dakotas, Nebraska, and northern Kansas, are looking at below freezing temperatures again this weekend, 29 to 31 degrees in some locations. The winter wheat growing in those fields right now is not dormant. It is at the jointing and boot stages, the critical reproductive growth phases, when the developing grain head is pushing upward through the stem and is most vulnerable to cold injury at the growing point. A freeze during the boot stage does not just damage the current tiller, it kills the primary head entirely, forcing the plant to attempt grain fill on secondary tillers with significantly lower yield potential. 3 cold events across the northern plains during jointing and boot stage, which is exactly what May 2026 has delivered, will be visible in the USDA crop condition reports over the coming weeks, and in the harvest yield data when combines roll through those fields in June and July. The frost this weekend is not only a garden story and an orchard story. For the northern plains, it is a food supply story, and that dimension of it is barely being covered.